We were all sitting at the dinner table, my son, my daughter-in-law, and even my 3-year-old granddaughter. Everyone had a plate, except me. "I thought you already ate lunch, didn't you, Ma?" she said, not even looking up. "Don't be greedy." My son kept eating, eyes glued to his phone. I didn't argue. I just stood up, walked to my bedroom, unlocked the drawer by my late husband's photograph, and pulled out the house deed. They forgot whose name was still on the title. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. I wasn't always like this. Quiet, calculated, tired. Once, I was the kind of woman who made the house smell. Like jasmine and roasted cumin. My hands always busy, grading school essays by day, kneading dough by evening. I taught 4th grade for 32 years and came home to a man who never once raised his voice at me, even when I burned the curry or forgot. Where I kept his socks, my husband Arvind built this house himself. Not literally with bricks and cement, but with his dreams and paychecks. Every corner held a story. The way the back window creaked, that was his stubbornness. The extra shelf in the kitchen cabinet, that was his care. When he passed from a DI, sudden stroke, I didn't cry at the funeral. I stood still, nodding as people told me to be strong. But that night, when I entered our room and saw his slippers still by the bed, I knelt down and wept into them like they could still carry his feet home. Our only son, Rohan, had married just a year before Arvind's death. He and Priya, my daughter-in-law, were working professionals, renting a cramped flat downtown. When I suggested they move in with me, it wasn't out of loneliness. I told myself, this is what families do. We come together. I gave them the master bedroom, our bedroom. The biggest one, with the ensuite bathroom and the large bay window Arvind had insisted on. She's pregnant, I told myself. She needs comfort. I moved into the smaller guest room, the one near the kitchen. I didn't mind. I actually liked hearing the kettle whistle and the birds outside early in the morning. I told myself, this was a new chapter, not an ending. In the beginning, it felt like a family. I helped set up the nursery, stitched tiny curtains with clouds on them. I made Priya almond milk during her pregnancy and read her baby books from my school library. I cooked their favorite meals when they came back from work late, and I kept the baby close when they needed to sleep in. I never asked for money. Not once. I said, this is your home now, and I meant it. But somewhere along the line, your home became not mine. They started rearranging furniture without asking. The dining table Arvind carved by hand, gone, replaced with a flat-packed piece from some modern showroom. My porcelain tea set, which I saved for decades, stored away, replaced by colorless ceramic mugs. Priya said I should modernize. I smiled and said nothing. Rohan, he always took the easy road. Don't start anything, Ma, he'd say whenever I raised a concern. She means well. So I stopped raising concerns. Birthdays went unremembered. My name gradually shortened from Ma to her. Sometimes I'd hear Priya on the phone. I can't concentrate. She's always around, breathing behind me. I started eating earlier, just to avoid tension at the table. I spent more time in the garden. I found peace in potting soil, even as the house grew colder. One day, I overheard Priya tell her friend, I can't wait until we can afford our own place. Living in someone else's house feels suffocating. Someone else's house? I was the someone. And yet, I held on. Because I loved my son. Because I loved my granddaughter. Because I remembered what it felt like to be young and stressed and uncertain. But love without dignity eventually rots. It wasn't just the tea sets or the forgotten birthdays. It was in the looks, the sighs, the locked bathroom door when I needed it. The way my food was quietly pushed aside, untouched. It built up in small pieces, like dust. Until the day came when I wasn't even given a plate at the table I used to pray over. That day, I realized, I hadn't just given up my room. I had given up my place. But I wasn't going to die invisible. I used to be the woman who nurtured everyone else's comfort. That day, I began nurturing my own silence. And from that silence, something powerful started to bloom. The strange thing about cruelty is that it rarely arrives all at once. It tiptoes in, like a slow leak in the ceiling. You don't notice it until it stains everything. At first, it was just little things. Priya started taking over the grocery shopping, which I welcomed. I thought it was her way of contributing. But soon, my list was ignored. The lentils I preferred were replaced with imported quinoa. The familiar spices were replaced with jars I couldn't pronounce. She started calling my cooking heavy. Once, I made aloo gobi for dinner, my specialty. Priya came home, took one sniff, and said, "Ugh, all that ghee," my nutritionist would scream. She didn't touch her plate. Rohan chuckled awkwardly and ordered takeout. I still remember washing the untouched food off their plates that night, hands trembling under the cold water, as if scrubbing harder would clean the shame too. When their daughter, little Mira, started walking, I crocheted her a pair of soft wool slippers. She was delighted. But when Priya saw them, she gently took them off and said, "We're trying to avoid outdated materials. Wool causes allergies." She replaced them with rubber-soled shoes ordered online. My hands, once so sure with children, became hesitant. I stopped picking Mira up unless I was directly asked. I stopped singing to her during her naps. Eventually, I just stopped. Rohan noticed now and then. He'd say, "Ma, you don't talk much these days." And I'd smile and reply, "You both work hard. I try not to disturb your peace." I said it like a compliment. But in truth, I was erasing myself to make room for them. Once, when they were both working late, Mira got sick. Fever, vomiting. I nursed her through the night, pressing cold cloths to her head, whispering lullabies, praying over her tiny body. In the morning, Priya came home, took one look, and said, "Why didn't you call the doctor?" I had. He said, "To monitor her and come in only if the fever didn't break." But that didn't matter. All that mattered was that it wasn't done her way. That evening, I heard them arguing behind a closed door. Rohan said, "She stayed up all night." Priya hissed back, "She's not her mother." Those words bruised me more than I can explain. The irony? I wasn't trying to be her mother. I was just trying to love. But there's no room for love. In a house where respect has been evicted, the small daily rejections grew sharper. I wasn't asked before they painted over Arvind's study. My study now. They turned it into a home office, painting the teakwood walls with matte gray. No one asked if they could donate my bookshelf, the one with all my teaching awards. They forgot I had a life before them. And yet I made excuses for a long time. They're tired. They're stressed. They don't mean it. Because acknowledging the truth meant facing something colder than cruelty, indifference. The only person who seemed to notice was Mrs. Sharma, my neighbor. She was widowed too. We'd meet in the garden sometimes. She grew roses. I grew curry, leaves. One day, after I waved at Mira through the window and she didn't wave back, Mrs. Sharma quietly said, "They don't see you anymore, do they?" I blinked fast to stop tears. "She's just a child," she nodded. "So were mine once." Then they learned by watching. I knew what she meant. Children don't learn how to love by command. They learn by example. The next morning, I found one of my teacups in the trash. The porcelain one with blue peacocks, the last one from my wedding set. Cracked in two. No note, no apology. I picked it up, pressed the pieces together in my palms, and realized it wasn't about the cup. It was about memory, about erasure. They weren't just pushing me out of their lives, they were sanding me out of my own home. That was the day I opened. The old filing cabinet. The one Arvind had told me never to throw out. I found the property papers, still crisp in their envelope. The deed in black and white was clear. My name, my signature, sole owner. I stood there, fingers trembling over ink, and whispered to the photograph on the wall, "You were right. People do change." I had spent years lowering my voice so others could feel louder in my home. But with one document, I remembered. The title they dismissed was the title I legally held. It was a Sunday, the kind where sunlight filters in softly and makes the kitchen tiles glow. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, just a banana with tea. I spent the afternoon in the backyard, pruning the curry leaf plant and watering the basil. My back hurt, but there was something peaceful in that ache. It reminded me I was still alive, still growing. Inside, I heard pots clanging, the smell of masoor dal simmering with cumin and garlic wafting through the windows. My recipe. Priya was making dinner. That in itself was rare. She usually ordered food on weekends. I smiled softly, heart tugging, at the idea that maybe, just maybe, this was her way of reaching out. A peace offering. At 7 p.m., she called everyone to the table. The dining table had changed over the years. New wood, new chairs, no lace runner like I used to place, but it was still centered under the same old light, the one Arvind installed. With his own hands. I sat down at my usual spot, second from the left, not the head. That seat now belonged to Rohan. Meera was already in her high chair, playing with a spoon. Priya brought out warm rotis wrapped in cloth, a bowl of dal, sautéed. Okra, rice, and even mango chutney. The sight made my chest swell, not with hunger, but with hope. Then she started serving, rice for Rohan, okra for Meera, 2 rotis and chutney for herself, and then nothing. She turned and sat down, smiling at Meera. I waited. Maybe she forgot. Maybe there was more coming. I cleared my throat gently. Could I get a little dal? She didn't look up. You already ate lunch, didn't you, Ma? I did, but that was at 10. I smiled, trying not to make it awkward. Just a little, please. Priya finally glanced at me, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. We don't have enough. We made just enough for us. I blinked. You mean, there isn't one more? Ladle? Rohan didn't even pause from his chewing. Didn't say a word. My lips went dry. I glanced at the pot on the stove, still half full. I looked at my son, but he didn't meet my eyes. So I nodded. Of course, no problem. The rest of the dinner passed in silence, punctuated only by Meera's babbling and the sound of stainless. Steel against porcelain. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, while the smell of my own recipe curled around me like a cruel joke. When they were done, I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I peeled a banana and ate it slowly by the sink. My stomach was hollow, but my heart was quieter than it had ever been. Not calm, quiet. There's a difference. After washing the single cup I'd used that morning, I walked to my bedroom. I didn't turn on the light. I sat in the dark for a long time, the walls around me breathing memories. The sound of Arvind's laughter, the weight of Meera's baby body in my arms, the echo of, "Ma, where's my lunchbox?" from years ago. Now, there was only silence. I got up, pulled out the drawer beneath the wooden dresser where Arvind's photograph rested beneath a fresh marigold. The legal documents were there, untouched since the day I found them. Property papers, tax records, utility bills, all in my name. I placed them on the bed gently, smoothed out the creases. Then I opened the cupboard and pulled out an old envelope set, faded ivory with blue borders. I took out one and wrote their names on it with the same care I used when writing report cards years ago, Rohan and Priya. I didn't write the contents yet, but I would. Because something had shifted that night. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even pain. It was recognition. Recognition that I no longer needed to wait for love to return. I no longer had to trade my dignity for crumbs of warmth. I had a home. They had a stay. There's a difference. The next morning, I began walking differently, straighter. I stopped apologizing for stepping into the living room while they were on video calls. I cooked what I liked. I lit incense without asking. I stopped waiting for their leftovers. Priya noticed first. "Is everything okay, Ma?" I smiled. "Everything's perfectly fine, Beta." The second she left for work, I called the lawyer my friend Mrs. Sharma had recommended months ago. Just in case, Mr. Deshmukh was kind and firm. "You're the legal owner, madam. If you feel unsafe or disrespected, you have the right to issue a formal eviction." My throat tightened. "They're my son and daughter-in-law." "Even family," he said gently, "should not live rent-free in your heart if they're charging you dignity for it." I didn't cry. I just asked him to prepare the papers. 30 days, that's all I would give. That night, they fed their egos and starved. My presence, but what they didn't realize was, I'd already begun setting their final meal. Not of food, but of consequence. The night after I called the lawyer, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window in my room, watching the street lamp flicker outside. The ceiling fan hummed, and somewhere down the hall, Mira let out a soft cry in her sleep. I waited for Priya to soothe her, but the house stayed silent. I stayed still. That's what I had become. Still. Not peaceful. Just paused. Like a show no one came back to finish watching, and that stillness took me backward, back into the corners of memory I hadn't touched in years. I remembered Arvind's last morning. It was winter, cold enough that I wrapped his scarf twice around his neck before he left for the milk run. He chuckled, tugging at the ends. "You worry too much. One day you'll smother me with love, Shanti." 2 hours later, a neighbor knocked on the door, breathless, saying he collapsed by the vendor stall. When I saw him in the hospital bed, the stillness on his face was foreign, like he'd gone too far away in too little time. My hands shook as I held his fingers. "You didn't even say goodbye," I whispered. The doctor said it was a stroke, instant, painless. But grief is never painless for the one left behind. He had insisted on keeping the house in my name. "Not because I don't trust Rohan," he said, "but because I trust life less." At the time, I had scolded him. "What kind of thinking is that?" He smiled, resting his head against my shoulder. "The kind that protects you when I no longer can." Now, years later, his caution had become my shield, but even with the papers secured, I wasn't ready to act. Not fully. That's the thing about betrayal by family. It doesn't come with clean lines. It comes with shared memories that won't let go. I thought about Rohan as a boy, his obsession with kites, how he'd run through this very hallway, his hands covered in glue and colored paper. I'd once stayed up till midnight helping him decorate a school project, a miniature Taj Mahal. He used to kiss my forehead before school. Now, he barely looked up when I entered a room. Then came a deeper memory, one I had locked away. It was a few years ago, just after Priya gave birth to Mira. I was in the kitchen, rocking the baby, while Priya sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. Rohan came in, saw me singing to Mira, and smiled. "She's going to be just like you, Ma. Calm, always humming." Priya snorted. "Let's hope not. I don't want her growing up with those ideas of sacrificing everything for a thankless family." He didn't say anything, just looked down at his shoes. I stood there, holding his daughter, the warmth of her cheek pressed to my collarbone, and in that moment I felt dismissed, diminished. Not by what was said, but by what wasn't. No one defended me. That day, I almost packed my things. Almost. But Mira giggled in her sleep and reached for my finger, and I stayed. I stayed when I wasn't appreciated. I stayed when my cooking was mocked. I stayed when my worth was measured in convenience. But now, something inside had begun to erode. I had only cried once in front of them, quietly. It was during a Diwali 3 years ago. They'd gone to Priya's parents' place claiming the traffic would be easier this way. They left me alone with a box of dry sweets and a WhatsApp message. No lights were strung that year. No oil lamps, just a dark house and one diya flickering in the kitchen window. I cried into my dupatta, chest heaving like a broken machine. But the next morning, I had swept the floors and made kheer, just in case they returned early. They didn't. Now, as I sat watching the glow of the hallway nightlight under my door, I realized I had mourned them for years while they still lived under my roof. It wasn't one insult that broke me. It was the weight of so many left unchecked that finally crushed my silence. I got up and went to my wardrobe, reached up to the high shelf where I kept a wooden box lined with velvet. Inside was a gold chain Arvind gave me on our 25th anniversary. I used to wear it to weddings, to special occasions. I held it in my hand, fingers brushing over the intricate filigree. This was who I used to be. Loved, cherished, seen. Didn't know who that woman had become, but I knew this. She wasn't going to fade without a voice. The next day, I walked into the lawyer's office in a pale blue sari, the one Arvind liked best. The one I hadn't worn since his funeral. I handed Mr. Deshmukh the envelope I'd written their names on. "I'm ready," I said. He looked at me and nodded with quiet respect. "I'll process it today. 30 days notice? You don't have to say another word if you don't want to, but I did want to say something, not to them, to myself. You are not a relic. You are not a burden. You are not disposable. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes silence can feel heavier than words. For years, I cried behind closed doors, thinking my pain was mine to carry. But now, I had written their names not on a plate, but on a notice. And that notice would become my voice. The strangest part of reclaiming your dignity isn't the shouting. It's the silence, the calm that comes when you finally stopped begging for scraps of kindness. The day the notice was finalized, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like the surface of a deep, unmoving lake. I walked home slowly, the envelope tucked into my handbag, brushing against my side with every step. A quiet metronome of resolve. When I entered the house, Rohan and Priya were in the living room, watching something on TV. Mira was napping. I could smell popcorn and some kind of frozen snack heating in the air fryer. None of them looked up. No one asked where I'd been. I walked to my room, closed the door. I didn't tape the notice to their bedroom. I didn't slide it under their door. I waited. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I made tea just for myself in the one remaining porcelain cup. I dusted off the edges and used my grandmother's silver spoon to stir in the sugar. It felt like a ceremony. That week, I started treating them like guests, pleasant, distant, formal. I cooked, but only for myself. I stopped asking if they'd be home for dinner. I stopped offering chai in the afternoon. I stopped folding Rohan's laundry when it came out of the dryer. On Thursday, I made mung dal halwa, slow-cooked, rich with ghee. The scent wafted through the entire house. Priya walked into the kitchen and asked, "Oh, is that halwa? You didn't make any extra?" I smiled. I only had enough for one bowl. Just for me. She blinked, confused. Right? Of course. I watched her walk away, and it didn't hurt. It felt like peace. That weekend, I left early in the morning and returned with a new lock for my bedroom door. I installed it myself. Rohan noticed. "Why are you locking your room, Ma?" he asked. standing in the hallway, arms folded. I didn't look up. For privacy, he gave me a long stare but didn't respond. The silence between us had taken on a new shape. No longer the silence of fear, but of boundaries. On Sunday evening, I prepared a plate with 3 neatly folded documents. I placed them on the dining table, right where they always sat, where I used to sit, back when I was still invited. Under the documents, I placed an empty silver plate, the same one they had left for me, untouched. The symbolism was intentional. 30 days, the formal eviction notice, was written in clear legal terms, stamped, signed, and witnessed. It stated plainly that I, Shanti Verma, legal homeowner, was exercising my right to reclaim full and exclusive occupancy of the property. They had 30 days to make alternate arrangements. That night I went to bed early. I slept well. The next morning, I found the documents back on the dining table, slightly creased. Rohan didn't leave a note. He didn't knock on my door, but the tension in the house became thick, like walking through fog. 2 days passed before anyone said anything. It was Priya. I was pouring tea in the kitchen when she stepped in, her arms crossed tight. She didn't look angry, just bewildered. "You're serious about this?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud. If anything, it trembled. I nodded once. "Yes," she blinked. "You're evicting us? Your own son? Your granddaughter?" "I'm asking for my home back," I said, calm, steady. "What you choose to feel about that is yours to carry." Her lip quivered. "We didn't mean to make you feel unwanted." "I didn't feel unwanted," I replied. "I was unwanted. There's a difference." She didn't respond, just walked out slowly, shoulders stiff. Later that night, Rohan came to my door. Knocked once. I opened it halfway. "Ma," he began, but the words stopped coming. I waited. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes." "Why now?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Because I've been patient long enough, and I finally understand that silence doesn't make me noble. It just makes me complicit." He looked away. "We didn't know you felt this way." "You didn't ask, Rohan, and when I gave, you took. But when I needed, you turned your face away." He didn't argue, just nodded faintly and left. That week, they began to clean. Slowly, quietly, boxes began to appear in corners. Closet doors opened and stayed open. I went about my routine with ease. I watered the plants, took longer walks. I even went to the temple and lit a daya for Arvind, thanking him, finally, for his foresight. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow inside my own walls. The house had grown cold over the years, but now the sun had begun slipping back through the curtains. It wasn't a victory. It was a return to self. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I simply handed back the silence they gave me, but this time in the form of legal paper. And with every box they packed, I unpacked a little more of my peace. By the second week, the house had changed its rhythm. Gone were the evenings filled with laughter from the living room, the hum of Priya's phone calls on speaker, or Mira's toys scattered in every corner. What remained was tension, tightly coiled, like a spring pressed down too long. I noticed it first in the way Rohan began staying out later. He'd come, home past midnight, and slip quietly into the guest room they'd started using temporarily. His eyes, once distant, now avoided mine completely, not out of anger, but shame. And Priya. Her steps had grown heavier. She no longer hummed when making her morning coffee. In fact, she barely cooked at all. Their groceries started arriving in smaller bags. I noticed them whispering, making calls behind closed doors, arguing and sharp. Bursts muffled by walls. It was clear. They hadn't planned for this. They thought they'd have years, maybe forever. A house inherited by default. A mother faded into the background. But I was no longer the background. I had become the threshold. And now they had to cross it. One evening, as I was watering my plants, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. The door wasn't fully closed. "You said she'd never do anything," Priya hissed. "You told me she didn't have it in her." "I didn't think she did," Rohan snapped back. "She's Ma. She barely raised her voice our entire lives." "Well, now she's raising lawyers." Silence, then more quietly. "What are we going to do?" I stepped back before they noticed, not out of fear, out of finality. Whatever they were going to do no longer involved me. Later that night, I found Mira sitting on the stairs, holding one of her stuffed elephants. She looked up and said, "Nani, are we going away?" I knelt beside her, brushing her hair back gently. "You and Mama and Papa are going to have a new house soon." She frowned. "I like this house." I smiled, but it wobbled. "So did I." She leaned into me, and I held her for a long time, memorizing the feel of her tiny heartbeat against my chest. The next day, the pleading began. Rohan waited until Priya took Mira to preschool. He stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, looking more like the teenage boy I once tucked into bed than the man who let me go hungry at his table. "Ma, can we talk?" I didn't move. "About what?" "About all this. I know things. Got bad. We made mistakes. I made mistakes. I turned to face him. You stood by and watched your wife disrespect me in my own home. You let her silence me." "I didn't know how to stand up to her," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't want to make things worse." "You didn't want to be uncomfortable." He swallowed hard. "I never thought it would come to this." I sighed. Neither did I. But then again, I never thought my own son would sit quietly while I was denied food. His eyes filled. "Please, don't make Mira suffer for our mistakes. She loves you." "I love her too," I said, "which is why I've written her a letter. Someday, when she's old enough, you'll give it to her." He nodded slowly. "So, that's it?" "That's it." That night, Priya slammed a door. Then another. She banged dishes in the kitchen, loudly, clumsily, like a child trying to stir guilt from steel. I didn't flinch. She stormed into the living room, cornered Rohan. "This is your fault," she seethed. "You told me she was harmless, that this house would be ours." "She was harmless," he muttered, "until we made her feel invisible." The truth hung in the air like incense, bitter, lingering. Over the next few days, they became strangers in the very place they tried to own. I began unlocking windows, letting the breeze back in. I played old records softly in my room, Lata Mangeshkar, Jagjit Singh, songs that once filled our home with joy. Now they sounded like goodbye. Mrs. Sharma came over with fresh methi parathas one morning. "You look better," she said, her eyes scanning mine. "Like someone who finally stopped bleeding from 1,000 invisible cuts." I chuckled softly. "Or someone who finally found the bandage was in her own pocket all along." She squeezed my hand. As the third week rolled in, the house was quieter than ever. Fewer shoes by the door, fewer footsteps overhead. Mira had begun sleeping in their room again, and then, one afternoon, I found a sticky note on the fridge. "Will I be gone by Friday?" R and P. apology. No confrontation, just surrender. But it didn't feel victorious. It felt like clearing debris after a storm. They once filled my home with noise and neglect. Now, their silence confirmed what I had always feared. Love without respect is just proximity, and sometimes walking away is the most honest thing anyone can do. Friday morning came soft and gray. A dull, overcast sky settled over the house like a final sheet, pulling the light down. I woke early, not from restlessness, but from readiness. There was nothing left to anticipate, only the last movement of a performance I never auditioned for. The living room was already half empty. Boxes were stacked neatly by the door. Priya's yoga mat, Mira's toys in clear bins, the rice cooker, the baby bath, a stack of mismatched mugs. All of it arranged with the kind of mechanical precision people use when they want to leave quickly, without thinking too hard. Rohan sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring into nothing. I didn't ask if he needed help. That was my mistake before, offering, giving, cushioning his discomfort, while mine festered in silence. Instead, I walked past him and began dusting the photo frames on the wall. One of the frames held a picture of Arvind and me on our 30th anniversary. I was wearing a cream-colored sari, he in a blue kurta, his arm around me. The kind of quiet, natural affection no camera could fully capture. Rohan glanced over as I wiped the frame. "You really loved him," he said softly. "I still do," I replied. There was a long pause. "I wish I'd protected you like he did." I didn't answer, not to punish him, but because some truths don't need to be confirmed. They just need to be felt. Around noon, Priya came down the stairs carrying Mira. The little girl looked sleepy, confused. She reached for me instinctively, arms stretched, murmuring, "Nani." Priya hesitated, then let her come. I held her close, resting her head against my shoulder. For a brief moment, I closed my eyes and breathed her in, milk, soap, and the faintest hint of sandalwood from my hair oil she used to play with. I didn't cry. I wouldn't give this goodbye that power. Instead, I whispered in her ear, "You are always welcome here. Always." Then, gently, I carried her over to her toy box. Hidden at the bottom was a small envelope with her name written on it in my neatest script. Mira. Inside it was a letter. I'd written it a week ago, telling her about her Nani, about who I was before, the silence, about the garden I'd planted, the lullabies I used to sing, and the strength that grows in women like wildflowers, quiet but unkillable. Priya noticed the envelope but didn't say a word. It was nearly 2 p.m. when they began loading. The last items into the car, a blue sedan with a roof rack and a tired engine. Rohan came back inside once more to get Mira's sippy cup. He paused in the doorway, looked around, then looked at me. His voice cracked. "Where did we go so wrong, Ma?" I looked up from the table where I was trimming the stems of fresh marigolds for the evening prayers. "You forgot I was a person," I said simply. "Not just a function." He swallowed hard. "Will we ever come back from this?" I thought about that, truly, then replied, "That depends on whether you come back to apologize or to repeat the pattern." He gave a single, tight nod. Priya didn't come back in. She stayed in the car, face turned toward the window, one hand gently stroking Mira's hair. As they pulled away, I stood in the front doorway. Not to wave, not to chase, just to witness the leaving. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, honest, and real. When the car turned the corner and vanished from view, I stepped back inside, closed the door, turned the latch. Slowly, it echoed. For the first time in months, maybe years, the house felt still, but not tense. Spacious, but not lonely. I walked from room to room, opening windows, letting in the light. The master bedroom was empty. I stood in the doorway and stared at the space that once held two versions of me. One who gave everything, and one who finally took something back. I would repaint it, I decided. Something bright, maybe lavender, or marigold yellow. Downstairs, I found a single sock left under the couch. Mira's. I folded it and placed it gently in the top drawer of my dresser. It wasn't sentimentality. It was a bookmark. The story wasn't over. But this chapter had ended. Later that evening, I made myself a full meal. Dal, jeera rice, okra with mustard seeds, and warm rotis with ghee. I lit a diya beside Arvind's photo and said a small prayer. not for them. For me, a prayer of release, of return. They left the house thinking they were leaving me behind, but as their car disappeared down the street, I realized what they took was noise. What I reclaimed was my name. The days that followed were still, not empty, not lonely, just still. It's strange how noise clings to a house, how it settles into corners like dust, and when it's gone, what remains isn't silence, it's breath. For the first time in years, the house exhaled. So did I. I woke early and didn't dread the morning. I made my tea with cinnamon and cardamom, exactly how I liked it. I opened all the curtains, let the breeze in. Played old Bajans on the radio while I dusted the shelves. I moved my things back into the master bedroom, not because I needed the space, but because it was mine. I slept on my side of the bed, Arvind's side untouched, as always. But now, I no longer did it out of grief. I did it out of gratitude. He had protected me even in his absence. The eviction notice had been just paper, but what it symbolized was more than law. It was liberation. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't tell neighbors. I didn't post about it in any WhatsApp groups. The victory was personal and sacred. A week after they left, I received a message from Rohan. "Hi, Ma. We're settling in. It's a small place, but Mira's doing okay. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because healing requires time. Mine, not his. Instead, I opened the small community center flyer I'd kept on my fridge for months. It was for a seniors meetup, chai, board games, and storytelling. I went. They welcomed me like I belonged there. And for once, I didn't feel like someone's background character. I was Shanti Verma, retired teacher, widow, survivor of quiet neglect. One of the women, Mrs. Patil, said she wished there was a place where elders could talk about these things. About the way respect evaporates in modern families. How love is used as currency. How motherhood often becomes martyrdom. So I offered an idea, a support circle, every Thursday, for women who felt like their names had been erased by those they once nurtured. We called it Second Bloom. It started small, 5 women, then 10. By the 3rd week, chairs had to be borrowed from other rooms. We talked, we cried, we sipped chai and wrote letters we never intended to send. Some of us laughed so hard we forgot we were grieving. I shared my story too, carefully, honestly, and they listened, not as daughters or daughters-in-law or neighbors, but as equals. One of them said something I'll never forget. "You didn't just save your house, Shantiji. You saved your soul. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not fixing what broke, but reclaiming the parts of yourself you were." Told to shrink, 2 weeks later, Rohan called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Ma," he said, voice low, "I know you're still angry, and you have every right, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to do better. I've started helping Mira brush her teeth. I take her to school. I cook now, sometimes." I didn't say anything. He continued. "Priya's still struggling. She doesn't say much, but I know she feels it." There was silence. "I'm not asking to come back. I miss you." I closed my eyes. Let the words wash over me, not to forgive, not yet, but to hear him, to allow him to be human too. "I miss Mira," I said softly. "Tell her I still have her elephant. It's waiting for her." He let out a shaky breath. "I will." That was enough, for now. Later that day, I walked through the house with fresh marigolds, placing them in every room. I moved the couch slightly to the left, like it used to be when Arvind was alive. I finally rehung the wind chime that Priya had found tacky. The house was mine again. But more importantly, I was mine again. I still thought of Mira often. I kept her drawings in a folder by my bedside. I read the letter I'd written her once a week, just to remind myself that love, when honest, leaves echoes, not chains. And one Sunday morning, as I stood in my garden trimming the basil, I heard a small voice behind me. "Nani?" I turned. Mira stood at the gate, holding Rohan's hand, a flower clutched in her tiny fist. I walked to her, knelt down. She held out the flower. "It's for you." I took it. "Thank you, my sweetheart." Rohan met my eyes. "We're not here to stay, just to visit, if that's okay." I nodded. Not everything needs to be opened all at once. Some doors deserve to remain ajar, for air, not entry. We sat on the veranda for 15 minutes. That was all. But those 15 minutes were stitched with something that had long gone missing. Respect. Have you ever had to choose between family and self-respect? What did you do? And would you do it again? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who it might help. They left believing I would break. But in the silence that followed, I built something stronger than forgiveness. I built myself again. People think strength is loud. They think it looks like shouting or walking out with suitcases or slamming doors hard enough to make the walls. Remember, but real strength, my kind of strength, is quiet. It's what blooms in silence. It's the act of staying soft when the world hardens around you. I used to think motherhood meant giving endlessly. That if I just gave a little more, time, patience, food, my room, my voice, then love would come back around like a boomerang. But I learned something the hard way. Love without respect isn't love. It's servitude and silence, no matter how noble, is not the same as peace. I spent years lowering myself so others could feel tall. I made my voice smaller so theirs could echo louder. And the worst part? I thought that was love. I thought that was my job. Now I know better. Love is not measured by sacrifice. It's measured by dignity. And any love that demands the death of your self-respect is not love worth keeping. In this house, I don't wait for thank yous anymore. I don't serve food to people who serve back silence. I don't apologize for taking up space in rooms I built with my own hands. These days, I drink my tea warm, not after everyone else has had theirs. I spend my evenings tending to my plants, writing letters in my journal, meeting women like me who are learning, finally, to put themselves first. Some of them are older than me, some younger. But all of us share the same bruises, the kind you can't see but feel every time someone calls you too emotional or too old-fashioned or worse. A burden. One woman said her son told her she was lucky to live with him. I told her, "You're not lucky. You're giving." And now I want to say the same to anyone listening. If you've been told you're lucky to live in a home you built, if you've been made to feel small because your kindness was mistaken for weakness, if you've ever served others and been served back silence, you are not the problem. Sometimes the people we love forget that love must be watered with respect. And sometimes we have to stop setting the table for those who bring nothing but hunger. I didn't choose revenge. I chose distance. I didn't raise my voice. I raised a boundary. I didn't burn bridges. I built walls with open windows. So, love could still enter, but only if it knocked. People ask me if I miss them. And the truth is, I do. I miss the version of them I believed in, but I do not miss who I had to become to keep the peace. That version of me, the one who stayed quiet, who ate last, who smiled through Behzadi, is gone. In her place is someone older, yes, but also stronger. Sharper, softer too, but only in ways that matter. I wear my sari a little brighter now. I speak slower, but my words land firmer. I laugh more. I sing to the plants in my garden. And every evening, when the sun sets behind our neem tree, I light a diya and whisper a thank you to Arvind. Not for building me this house, but for reminding me to never give away the keys to anyone who doesn't know how to treat a home. This is my home, and now, finally, so am I. For years, I served everyone but myself. Now, I serve peace, and I don't need a seat at anyone's table because I built my own.